program was funded in part by Mott Community College, dedicated to serving the students and student veterans of Flint and Mid-Michigan through educational opportunities and services that support individual development since 1923. The Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, strengthening arts and culture in Michigan by increasing its visibility, supporting arts education, encouraging new, creative, and innovative works of art, and broadening cultural understanding. The Community Foundation of Greater Flint, building a strong community by engaging people in philanthropy and developing the community's permanent endowment, now and for generations to come. And by Peaceful Warriors Project, celebrating the music of United States veterans and helping preserve their stories.
Welcome to The Michigan Experience, where we highlight Michigan's contemporary and historical contributions. I'm your host, Michael J. Thorpe. It's the responsibility of every American community to remember, honor, and capture the stories of its veterans. With this project, we recognize our brave Michigan veterans for their service, hoping to inspire communities to forge a closer connection with veterans and their experiences. On this episode, Vietnam Veterans, we share the stories of Michigan veterans who served during the Vietnam War, a conflict that was not only highly unpopular, but also divided the nation. While that war was over 50 years ago and opinions of the conflict have changed, it's important to those brave men and women that we do not forget their sacrifice and their service to our country.
What I would say to our sisters and brothers who served in Vietnam is that for 241 years as a republic, men and women of our nation have left home, have gone to protect us, and they've risked everything. And for almost all of those 241 years, our nation has done a commendable job of recognizing their sacrifice and their service, with one exception. And that exception is the Vietnam War. And what I want to say to our veterans of the Vietnam War is, your nation, your state, your community, we remember, we acknowledge, and we thank you for your sacrifice. And whether you served in country, in Vietnam, where if you were a soldier in country, in Vietnam, in 365 days, on average, you were in contact with the enemies of the United States for 240 days. If you were a soldier in Vietnam, 1 out of 10 was either injured or killed. So every one of those veterans from that era who served in country, but also the veterans who never left CONUS, or the veterans who were standing their watch in West Germany to defeat the Soviet Union and communism, thank you. Thank you for your sacrifice, because whether you were in country or whether you stood the watch and you helped defeat communism during the Cold War, your nation owes you a debt of gratitude. We are grateful for it. We thank you. We are sorry it took us 50 years, sometimes, to recognize this. I get thanked and have been thanked so many times for being a veteran, from 1984 until 2012 when I took off my dress blues for the last time. I can't even imagine why our nation didn't recognize the sacrifice of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines and what they did on behalf of liberty when called. They answered the bell. Now it's our turn to answer the bell for them. With your project like this, giving them a chance to tell their story. And I never did anything heroic. I had a lot of different assignments that I had the privilege of serving in, but it was a privilege to wear the cloth of my nation for 27, 28 years. The women and men who served in Vietnam, they deserve every recognition we can give them. We are grateful and we thank them.
Fresh out of high school, Chris Eilerson enlisted in the United States Air Force. He was shipped out to Vietnam at the height of the war, and he still has a hard time talking about his experiences. There was a different mood in the country back then. There were over 500,000 U.S. military personnel involved with the war. However, during those years, a large segment of the population was anti-military.
I went in '71. The mood in the country was, 360 degrees different than it is as far as the military now. Everybody that puts on a uniform now as a hero, and we were viewed as the total opposite. You go back and look at some of the newsreels, and you can see how people felt about it. But it was everybody was protesting the war. Everybody our age were protesting the war. They felt it was an unjust war. That everybody was over there killing civilians and babies, and people were spit on when they came back. I knew people that actually said when they came back, they told people that they were in jail for a year because it was preferable for them to say that than it was for them to tell them they were in Vietnam. People looked on them more favorably than they did if they told them they were in the military. Very, very anti-military sentiment back then for a large part of the population. It was an explosive time in the country. A lot of things were happening. We were just coming out of the 60s where, a lot of people, tune in, turn on, and drop out. And it was an incredible time to live through. But as a 19-year-old, which the majority of us were 19 when we went to Vietnam, we didn't have any answers. So all of a sudden you did what your country told you to do, and people hated you for it.
Operation Babylift was enacted during the closing days of the war to get orphans out of Vietnam before the fall of Saigon. Phil Wise was a medical technician in the United States Air Force. He was on board a C-5A Galaxy aircraft loaded with hundreds of babies, children, and adults. The crowded plane took off, and the evacuation ordered by President Ford seemed to be headed towards success until the rear doors blew off at 25,000 feet, and everything changed.
Get to the rice paddies, and he clipped this tree line, and he ended up bellowing down after clipping the tree line. And we had the Saigon River. He ended up bellowing down on one side of the Saigon River, and we went airborne again. And we just barely cleared the other side of the river. And the aircraft bounced and broke apart. And keep in mind that when we bellied down, we had the belly full of passengers, and of course I was down there myself. And the crew compartment, which was upstairs. Now the C-5, from the wheel to tail, is a 5-story aircraft. So when we bellied down, the whole bottom just demolished. It was flattened, and debris was scattered for miles. And the crew compartment where the babies were, that part slid off the belly of the cargo section like a toboggan. It slides off, it broke away, and it rolled over and kind of slid off. So we only lost 2 kids in the crew compartment. But in the cargo compartment, we lost everybody. I found out later that I was the only survivor out of nearly 200 out of that cargo section. And then years later, I found there was a little 8-year-old boy that survived it, that suffered severe brain damage. Of course, I didn't remember any of that. But what they did, this Air America, which is an arm of the CIA, they cordoned off the crash site, because as soon as the plane crashed, the local villagers just raced to the crash site, just pillaging the crash site, just taking whatever they could. And so the CIA or the Air America people, they started cordoning off the crash site so we could try to keep these people from taking the belongings of crew or whoever was there that was part of the rescue. But anyway, the CIA saw me off to a distance in the burning wreckage, and my uniform was a white shirt with dress blue trousers. So they saw my white shirt off to a distance and said, wow, we better save the medic's body so it won't burn. So once they got to me, they found me hanging upside down, my left leg entangled in wire cable, and my head was open, my eyeball hanging out, my chest. They said, well, we better save his body so it won't charge. So they got to untangling me, and then they said, wow, this dude's still alive.
David Fix was stationed aboard a gigantic aircraft carrier where planes loaded with bombs took off on combat missions and landed safely back on the deck when they were finished. On the morning of July 29, 1967, as the planes were getting ready for an airstrike in North Vietnam, in one split second, everything took a turn for the worst as the lives of over 5,000 officers and enlisted men aboard the USS Forrestal were in danger.
None of us knows what's going on. We thought we got attacked, really. I mean, we heard these explosions, one right after another, about 7 or 9 explosions, and every one of them just shook the ship and sank the ship down into the water, and then it bounced back up, and we didn't have any idea what was going on at the time. Well, up on the flight deck, what was going on was a rocket. We were launching airstrikes, and one of the planes up there had a Zuni rocket on it, and for one reason or another, and they have exhausted every effort for many years to try and find out why this Zuni rocket dropped off the wing of the plane and ignited and took off across the flight deck, and it ran into John McCain's plane. John McCain was a shipmate of mine, and he was a fighter pilot. He was a lieutenant commander, and he was nothing back then. He was a Navy guy. He was not known. He was obviously not a senator or anything like that, but we knew of him, and this Zuni rocket ran into his plane, and his plane ignited. It hit one of the external gas tanks underneath the airplane, and his cockpit opened up, and John McCain got out of the cockpit and was sliding down the nose of the aircraft, and he took his hands and he jumped off onto the flight deck and ran about maybe 20 or 25 feet away from his burning plane, and it exploded. And it had 750-pound bombs on this plane. And those bombs exploded, and the shrapnel was killing people. It was igniting other aircraft on the flight deck, and pretty soon, within 2 or 3 minutes, the whole aft part of the flight deck was on fire. We were down in our repair party, and we were seeing all of these wounded guys, and it was just can't even talk about it.
Deployed to Vietnam during the early days of the war, John Gordy, a United States Marine, was a fire team leader. After his service, he joined the VFW, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, whose mission is to foster camaraderie among United States veterans of overseas conflicts. The VFW advocates on behalf of all veterans to ensure that they get recognition for the sacrifices that they and their loved ones have made for our country.
VFW is about veterans helping veterans, no matter what their problem is. I've met a lot of young people, like my wife and I volunteer at the Saginaw VA Hospital. We're the state reps from the VFW. I meet a lot of people up there who don't know where to go, who to turn to, or what's out there for them, what benefits they can get. And when I do meet one of the people, I try to refer them to a service officer. The hospital has a very good staff of service officers who are the best for veterans coming in. We have a new service officer here in Shiawassee County. He's doing a smack-up job, in my opinion. But kids coming home nowadays need to know what benefits are out there for them, what medical assistance they can get. And many of them are coming home with PTSD. We have an annex to the Saginaw VA Hospital where they can receive counselors who do a very good job for them. They've been adverse talk about the VA, but up there in Saginaw, I haven't seen any bad things happen up there. They're polite and they're friendly, respectful. And as far as I know, they do the best they can for patients and veterans coming in. Veterans are a family because they've served this country. Civilians who don't know what veterans go through have no clue. We have parades 3 or 4 times a year, marching down through Main Street. We have civilians who can't even get off their butts to at least stand up for the flag, let alone salute it. They had no concept of military life. Up until a few years ago, I was never thanked for my service. I used to work in a prison where a friend of mine came up to me and said, "Thank you for your service." I was blown away. I'd never heard that before. It's good now that more people are doing this. It gives you a good feeling. But veterans, no matter where they serve their country. No matter what branch they're in, we can all take pride in having served their country.
Glenn Ream, a member of the U.S. Air Force, was sent to Vietnam. His assigned job was as a plane refueler, making sure that aircraft were properly fueled before taking off. It was long shifts and hard work, but his Michigan roots had him well versed in manning the trucks used to refuel the planes. But one moment on one day found him caught in an accident that would change his life forever.
We had a truck that was brought in from Hawaii. It was a reconditioned truck. It was a 62 Ford R2, 5,000 gallon tanker. Well, predominantly we had what was called the GMC, which was the Chevy line of fuel trucks. They were 5,000 gallons, had dual axles. So the discussion came up of who's going to take this truck. So everybody, well, I don't know how to run this, da-da-da-da-da. So finally I just said, okay, I'll take it. So I went out onto the flight line with it. I got my first aircraft. I pulled up to it, and it had bomb crates sitting on each side of the revetment. There was what we called a blockbuster and a napalm, probably 250-pound bombs in each crate. Well, normally you get a fire truck sitting with you, but since they weren't on the aircraft, they said, no, just go ahead and do it. So we hooked up, the crew chief hooked up to we have a lock nozzle that goes on the side of the aircraft, and he had everything hooked up, and things were running real good. And he was topping off the drop tanks underneath the wings, and I thought, man, I should be checking to see how things are going on my end. And my truck is right here, and when I swung my head back and I looked down, there was fuel flowing across my left leg. And I went, uh-oh, and I had a switch on the panel that I could kill the engine on the truck. It didn't make it, and it exploded. I'm trying to figure out a way to get to the hospital because everybody's kind of ignoring me like I'm the plague. I did have an instance where I was standing there and there was 2 guys running towards me and they were pointing towards the ground. And I looked down and I was still burning. I had jungle boot on and I was still burning around the top. So I laid back down and I'm trying to wiggle around. Well, I was laying on my back and the sun was shining and my eyes are closed. And one guy said to the other guy, he said, well, how do we put it out? And he said, well, just take your hands and slap it real quick. So apparently he did that. I didn't, of course, have any feeling there by then. So then I'm thinking, well, they would stick around and give me some help, and I opened my eyes and looked, and nobody else around. Finally, one of the guys that worked on the same ship with me, another fuel truck driver, came up to me, and we commandeered a security police jeep, and they got me off to the hospital and got me sedated and bandaged and ready to be shipped back to the world, as we called it.
Alan Barnes, co-founder of the Peaceful Warriors Project, was a gifted musician, finding fame as part of a group known as the Blackbirds. In 1967, he enlisted in the U.S. Army and trained at the U.S. Armed Forces School of Music in Virginia Beach. He was deployed to Vietnam and joined the 4th Division Army Band, where his mission was one of great importance, entertaining the troops out in the field.
I played clarinet for maybe 3-4 years, and then I got an alto saxophone, and I played that throughout high school pretty much, and into my Army years. I played alto saxophone in the Army. I was with the 4th Infantry Division, and I was in the headquarters company band. But inside of that headquarters company band, we had a group called Hard Times that was actually formed by the guy that I replaced in Vietnam. His name was Henry Threadgill. He's a very famous alto saxophone player who lives in France right now. But anyway, Henry Threadgill started this group called Hard Times, and it was another saxophone player named Willie Driffin playing tenor, Mike Campbell playing bass, and a guy named Ken Pacelli playing drums. So there was just 4 pieces, nothing that you had to plug in or anything like that. So we got a chance to go and play for GIs way out in the field where you never would see Bob Hope or anything like that. So anytime that they would ask us if we wanted to go play, we would always accept, because they would be so grateful that anybody would just come out there to play for them, at a base camp. So we enjoyed what we did, So I'm saying that was one of the good parts about being in Vietnam, that the soldiers really appreciated the music.
That's it for this edition of the Michigan Experience, Vietnam Veterans. Remember to honor the veterans in your community, and don't forget to thank them for their service. We'll see you next time. I'm Michael J. Thorpe.
This program was funded in part by Mott Community College, dedicated to serving the students and student veterans of Flint and Mid-Michigan through educational opportunities and services that support individual development since 1923. The Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, strengthening arts and culture in Michigan by increasing its visibility, supporting arts education, encouraging new, creative, and innovative works of art, and broadening cultural understanding. The Community Foundation of Greater Flint, building a strong community by engaging people in philanthropy and developing the community's permanent endowment, now and for generations to come. And by Peaceful Warriors Project, celebrating the music of United States veterans and helping preserve their stories.
It's important to capture the stories of our veterans so that we, as a nation, as a community, as a state, as a family of Michiganians, understand the service and sacrifice that our sisters and brothers have given so that we can be free, so that every day we can walk down the street, turn left or turn right the way we choose to, because that's about freedom. We get to go to the polls and vote for who we want to, regardless of party, regardless of race, religion, regardless of economic circumstance, because of the bravery and the willingness to put aside their own private lives and to let these veterans say, and to tell these veterans, thank you. And it's important to have a program like this because it allows the veterans the opportunity to share sometimes extremely difficult situations that they went through, whether it was in peacetime and the difficult anxiety of separation from family, or whether it was the crucible of combat. To be able to share that and to see other veterans sharing it, it is a step towards wholeness that maybe it's the only way they can start it. And so having this opportunity is so fundamentally good for our 640,000 veterans. Maybe everybody won't participate, but if they have the chance to, that's the thing that helps, I think, move in the right direction.